Hello, welcome back to the Happy Baby Show. This is episode 105. In today's episode, I am going to be teaching you the difference between crying at sleep and crying it out. Recently, I put up a story, I think, over on my Instagram, which if you're not following me, head on over at Jen Butler Early Parenting. I put up a story, or it was a post, and I was surprised with the questions that came back from everyone over there asking me or telling me stories about how horrible they felt because their baby was crying when they were going to sleep, even though mum or dad was present. And it made me realize that there must be other people out there who don't quite understand the difference between the cried out method and crying at sleep. So that is what we are going to dive into today. I'm going to start by teaching you about the cried out method. Now, there was I believe he was a pediatrician called Ferber. So let's say it's Dr. Ferber. Now, he was the one that created this cried out method. And basically, the method goes is that in order for a baby to learn how to self-settle and self-soothe, which those two terms in themselves are very different, there's going to be a whole new podcast episode on that one too. But just to give it a little bit of clarity, self-settling is the ability for your baby to fall asleep, which in fact babies are born with that ability, because otherwise if they didn't have the ability to fall asleep, then they wouldn't sleep, and obviously they do sleep. Self-soothing is to do with emotional regulation, and emotional regulation and the ability to self-soothe is learnt and supported through co-regulation through us. And it is definitely not something we expect babies to do, let alone toddlers, let alone young children. It takes a long time and a lot of co-regulation for our babies and toddlers to learn how to understand and manage their emotions. Anyway, that's going to deserve a whole podcast episode on its own. Now, Ferber, it was named the Ferber method, which, was later then called, or other names for it is called cried out. He put to the people that in order for our babies to learn how to be able to put themselves to sleep on their own, that they just simply needed to cry and to learn how to settle themselves, how to soothe themselves without any input from the parents. And this is the cried out method. So basically the crux of it is that you put your baby to sleep and you close the door. Now, I'm going to talk about the different versions of, but that is the crux of it, is that if you leave them, they will eventually sort themselves out. That was basically what the method was. Now, what I want to clear up is that whilst your baby or your toddler may indeed stop crying and put themselves to sleep, the reason behind that is quite sad, really, when you pick it apart, is that it's not that they have put themselves to sleep, but they also have learned to stop signaling. They've learned that crying isn't actually going to get a response. Now, this, for anyone who's done this, this is not a guilt trip. This is not to make you feel bad. All we do is and if you go actually into my episode, which was episode 103, where I talk about making sure that you understand people's credentials, people's expertise, the way that they teach. That's why I did that episode, because it's so important to find out where people are coming from. If you are choosing to follow a parenting book, to listen to someone's advice, you need to find out their methodologies. Because if that doesn't align with your parenting values, then that's when you can choose someone else or read something else or follow a different philosophy, because there are people that will align with what you are looking for. So it's definitely not a guilt trip. We do what we do based on the knowledge we have. When we know better, we do better. That is the biggest crux of it. And that's why I wanted to do this episode. So it's definitely not about, and a lot of people say, have I harmed my child? You have not, because what can change is that you can become responsive. So at any point you can flick the switch and respond. And so if you have used that cried out method and you want to do things differently, then just start responding to those cries when your baby or your toddler is crying. Interestingly, just to add to this episode, I jumped on Google to find out all the different names that are used for the cried out method. And I came across an article by a doctor. So they are quoting Dr. Craig Canapari, MD, an associate professor of pediatrics, who is talking about why cried out is actually indeed fine. So he quotes that I think that it's ludicrous that people believe that cried out is harmful for a child's brain. Honestly, it really wouldn't make sense if kids got brain damage every time they cry. They cry all the time. This is like the epitome of why Google is a serious problem, because that is quoted by a doctor, and so that makes it feel like there's credibility behind it. But that information has been misconstrued, and he is flipping what the evidence is saying around how babies will stop signaling and how it changes their brain development in terms of the responsiveness, and saying that it's causing brain damage, which is not what the research says, but it does change the way your baby knows or learns how to respond or to signal and not to signal. So there's just a little bit of a side note to add to this episode as I was going through Google. So when it comes to going back to the names, there is names like controlled crying, the Ferber method, space soothing. I've heard of different ones that haven't come up when I have searched those. But basically, there is different forms of cried out where perhaps you have extended periods of time in between going to respond to your baby. Now, usually these periods of time, you're still responding to your baby. So I'm not saying that they're necessarily something that you should avoid, because offering our babies space can actually be really great in order for them to be able to fall asleep with us having to do all the things. And I'm going to touch upon this in a second. My only problem with having these timed approaches, and they're progressively getting longer when it comes to this, is that it could be 2 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 8 minutes, etc. And you're gradually extending how long it is before you re-enter the room. My problem with this way of quote unquote sleep training is that it's not at all teaching parents to listen to what their baby or their toddler is actually saying, because our babies, and it can be really confusing, don't get me wrong, that our baby's cries, it can be really hard for you to differentiate the difference between the grizzling versus the crying. But by only going by timed approaches, you are not allowing yourself that ability to learn, because our babies do have different levels of crying and different levels of urgency when they are signaling to us. Not all crying is the same. And I know the difference between when Georgie is just having a bit of a grizzle, and it's not even pitch related. It can be a loud grizzle, but then it's slowing down and stopping, and then she's going to sleep, versus I'll know very quickly whether or not she needs a hand. So that's my only problem with those space soothing techniques, is that it's not really taking into account what's going on for your baby at any given sleep time. Now, I don't teach cried out. I don't teach methods of space soothing where you're just gradually moving away and extending the time before you re-enter the room. But I also don't teach cry-free methods. Now, hear me out here. I believe that crying is a part of your baby or toddler's communication. It is the only way they communicate. My belief is that if we are trying to do a cry-free approach, we're ultimately preventing our babies or toddlers from sharing emotions. And I get it. Crying is not something that is easy for a parent to hear or to listen to. But it is an expression of emotion, and we need to be okay with our babies and toddlers expressing any type of emotion. We're always okay with the happy emotions, happiness and joy and laughter. They're easy emotions for us to handle as parents. Crying often triggers us. It can trigger us in super deep ways based on how we were parented. I won't go into all of this stuff, but it does. It triggers us, and it triggers us all to different levels. So I definitely don't believe in having cry-free approaches, because I want my children to be able to express and not suppress any emotion. But there is a big difference between crying at sleep and you responding and supporting it without having to completely take over and stop the crying at all costs, and the difference between, say, closing the door and just leaving them to their own devices until they stop signaling, or just even that spaced soothing where it's like we're not even taking into account what's going on for our baby and responding when they actually need us. So my philosophy is that crying is okay at sleep, and knowing when you need to respond and how to respond in a way that still offers them an opportunity to do that self-settling part, the part where I spoke about at the start, the difference between self-soothing, not asking them to manage their emotions on their own because they need us to help them with that when they're young, but also not completely taking over so they don't have any ability to fall asleep without all of the things. That is my philosophy. That is what I teach, and that is how I teach families how to support settling at sleep. And I do that inside my Sound Sleeper program, which is my self-paced sleep program, and I do that inside my Happy Baby program and Happy Baby Code membership as well. So that is the crux of my philosophy and what I personally believe in, and the reason why I believe in that. Because to me, there is a balance. You don't have to do it all and go for a cry-free approach, but you also don't have to do cry it out. There is a happy in between, I promise you, and it is what I have done 3 times with my children. I always will say I never sleep trained, and when I'm doing air quotes at the moment, bunny ears, because I hate the word sleep training, but when I think of sleep training, I think of the cried out method. I think of the space soothing. I think of all of those things where there's this really clear guide of you must not go in until now, and you must not, or you must just close the door, or whatever that looks like. That to me is sleep training. So I will always say I never have sleep trained my kids. They have, through meeting them at what they are developmentally capable of doing at whatever age it is, I have supported them in being able to bring out their innate self-settling, being able to fall asleep skills in a way that is responsive. So that is what I'll forever teach, and nobody can change my mind. Now, because we are in the Mother's Day giveaway period, I am going to be giving away a spot inside my Sound Sleeper program today. So if you've been joining me for all the episodes this week, I've been giving something away every single day. And today we are giving away a spot in the Sound Sleeper program. So if you would love to go in the draw to win the Sound Sleeper and find out what it's all about, you can head to jenniferbutler.online/giveaway to pop your entry in. If you are listening to this outside of the giveaway period and you want to get your hands on the Sound Sleeper, you can do so at any time and head to www.jenniferbutler.online/the-sound-sleeper. So THE Sound Sleeper, all one word. And you can learn what I teach families and the success that you too can have in having your baby or toddler sleep independently, but without having to resort to either a cry-free approach or a cried-out approach. You can learn the happy medium too. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to joining you in tomorrow's episode. Make sure, if you get the chance, it takes 2 seconds to rate and leave a review for the podcast if you do enjoy it, because it helps the podcast get out to more families who perhaps need to hear this message and learn and improve their parenting skills so they can love the crap out of being a mama and a papa. Anywho, I will